what are the critical aspects that developers now need to think about, and whether it would change if they are, yet to plan for the cloud or they are already on the cloud.
Yes, Umesh. I'll explain you how I look at this. If we start with a deployment view of the architecture, then we know that each of the components in the architecture is actually mapped to the deployment. Now, in the cloud era, that means it could be mapping to infrastructure as a service components, or platform as a service components, or a function as a service components. And cloud providers even go beyond that to give you certain services which would have required multiple components in your deployment architecture, like messaging and stuff like that. So with that, what happens is, as you rightly said, that developers come closer to the operations, which means that operational monitoring aspect of all these cloud services that we consume, that becomes very important to be related back to which components are doing what. So that is one thing that comes out of that higher level of abstraction that I used. Now, if we take a look at function as a service as an example, that if a component earlier used a mechanism where certain functions in their applications were triggered either on messages arriving in message queue or something else, they would have had different kind of components in their deployment architecture. One for file, one for timer going off, other for things like messages coming in. Now with cloud, function as a service gives them that abstraction which allows them to do that. Now if we use that as part of a user action, then because the entire infrastructure is managed by the cloud service provider, the moment that function ends execution, that entire infrastructure is not available for you to even query anything. Which means the way you do logging needs to change. You have to pay attention to logging the context in which the function was called. And if you do that, that eventually helps you in field debuggability. So that is one thing which one can look at. Earlier, all of that was directly possible by logging on the disk that was available. So you need to change that and pay attention to that. Other aspect is this function invocation is again part of a bigger user action. Now, if we take a performance point of view, then you also need to look at what metrics you need to gather before the function execution ends, so that any other performance related analysis to be done on the entire application will have enough information for that. So that is one thing which you have to pay attention to. Yeah, so we talked about field debuggability and performance. So that is something which is critical. Yeah. So again, another thing to look at for the function as a service thing is the fact that cloud provider tells you that you have to be worried about cold start and warm start. You have to be worried about number of calls, concurrent calls that a function can have. Now, if you look at it, in the past, we didn't have to worry about that because we created threads ourselves on the infrastructure which we had deployed. Now, these restrictions are placed by the cloud provider so that they can manage these things well. So now as a developer, I have to start worrying whether the cold start of a function is going to cause delays in user action. And if it does, then I have to make sure that I employ strategies to make it warm startable functions. Because otherwise, after infrequent requests going to that function, the cold start again kicks in. Which means these are some considerations that you have to put in right for your performance engineering part. So I think you take good things from the past and look at specific cloud features and how it has changed or whether it has put any constraints on you, and then adapt those things. And that's where I found the deployment view as a starting point to be very useful.